Welcome back to Hot Takes and Deep Dives, and my next guest is a prolific director of nearly every genre of television, including Gilmore Girls, The L Word, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Lena Dunham's Girls, Russian Doll, and most recently, Only Murders in the Building, and my favorite show of the year, A League of Their Own. But let's face it, we all knew her when, with the queer indie breakout, But I'm a Cheerleader, starring Natasha, Lyonne, and Clea DuVall. Hi, Jamie Babbitt.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
How are you? I'm so happy to meet you. I've been a fan since I was a teenager. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm currently working on my next project, which I'm in London doing kind of a princess feminist alt history show for Amazon. So I'm just doing my thing.
Oh my God. Yeah, you've been in London for a while. How is it just living in London?
It's awesome. There's a big tax credit here right now. So directors tend to follow tax credits. So whenever governments are giving out free money for content, Amazon, Netflix, whoever is chasing them. So I've been here for 6 months and I know 3 other directors living on my block in Notting Hill. So we're all here taking English money.
I've been trying to figure out where to start with this, and somehow my gut keeps telling me to start with this. And this is such a random thing. You directed one of my favorite scenes in The L Word. It was a cold open in season 5 in which let me know if you remember this scene.
Was it every character making out with another character?
Yes. It's this fantasy sequence where they're running through different pairings, like Shane and Bet and Helena, Tina and Shane. I just have to start, and we're going to run through all of your credits in a lightning round at the end, but I'm fascinated by this scene. How did you approach this?
I remember at the time there was this really cool Gap ad of a bunch, I think Spike Jonze directed it, of a bunch of couples dancing. And it was just a white background and really cool dancing. And I was like, let's just do it like that, where it's really simple background, just a white space. And then it was written that all of these different couplings are happening. And I remember at the table read when the actors read that, they were like, oh God, because a lot of them were really good friends at that point. And so it's playing spin the bottle where you have to make out with your friend, which feels like your sister, and it's really creepy and weird. So the actors were definitely a little, they were like, it's fine, but it's really bizarre when it's your friend and you have to make out with your friend. I wouldn't want to make out with my friends.
There's actually a little behind the scenes video of showing you in showing you in a tone meeting, and somebody else who was working on the episode. Maybe it was the DP. I don't even know if you knew you were being filmed, but you actually say who would be the bigger top, Bet or Shane, because that is one of the pairings. And I found that so funny that you just threw that out there.
I think it was helpful on the L Word to have gay directors, because we definitely have an insight into all of the peculiarities of gay and lesbian sex that I think a straight director would be like, wait, what? So I can't remember what happened in that scene. Was it Bet struggling and they were both kind of struggling to be the top? Is that what happened?
With that happened with Bet and Helena. With Bet and Shane, it was more it kept cutting back to Jenny and Tina in the the network, because they're doing the meta movie within the show, and they keep saying that would never happen, and that was the bit that all these pairings would never happen.
Yeah. At the time, Angela Robinson was running the writers' room with Eileen, and Angela Robinson is one of my oldest lesbian friends who I met at Gay Pride in the 90s when I was still in college. So it was really a blast to work with her. Might have been having that conversation with Angela because the DP was straight, so I can't imagine I would have engaged him in a top and bottom lesbian conversation. But I can imagine having that conversation with Angela.
And the irony is that, But I'm a Cheerleader came out in 99, which is probably the first comedic lesbian film, but there was The Incredibly True Adventures of Two Girls in Love with Laurel Holloman. Knowing that you were going in to do The L Word with Laurel, did you guys actually chat about that we were both part of these two indie romantic comedies?
In the early 90s, the lesbian community was so tiny that we're making films. So I not only knew Marie, but my whole friend group was working on Incredibly True Adventure of Two Girls in Love. And Rose Trochet was also around in the like lesbian world. I mean, think about it. We were all living in New York. There's one lesbian bar, like two lesbian bars. There was like the East Village one, and then there was the West Village one. And we all knew each other. So our friend groups were the same. People had rivalries and dated people and stolen their girlfriends and, you know, all the typical lesbian stuff. And so I definitely knew Laurel. I definitely knew Incredibly True Adventure. I knew the cast and the crew. And Rose Trochet directed the first episode of The L Word. So she basically took all the indie lesbian darlings and put them in one TV show. And the only person she really didn't put in was Clea DuVall. She was kind of the one that wasn't cast. But I think it was because Shane was basically playing Clea's part. So she was the one lesbian who never really made it into the L Word. Mm-hmm. It was just like a little community of lesbians, and Laurel was a part of it because of Incredibly True Adventure.
In preparing for this, it really got me thinking about Clea DuVall, and I wonder, like, did she audition for the part of Shane? Because that seems like they discovered Kate Menig, but Clea DuVall was kind of sitting right there. Do you know if she even was up for the part of Shane? It just makes so much sense.
Yeah, you should interview her. I don't know. What I'm imagining, just based on the time period, was that Clea was kind of half in the closet, half out of the closet, mostly in the closet. So I think they asked, and her agent probably said she wasn't interested. She was doing a bunch of quote unquote straight big Hollywood movies at the time, which was all kind of after But I'm a Cheerleader. Mm-hmm. And yeah, she was really kind of on the fence about coming out or not. So, but even, during But I'm a Cheerleader, she was very out with like our group of friends and in the lesbian scene in LA, she was very out. But when she started getting famous, her agents started scaring her. And I remember we were shooting But I'm a Cheerleader around that time that she was blowing up. And Clea was like, I don't want to do any gay press. And I was like, look, I'm your friend. You are doing gay press for But I'm a Cheerleader. And she was like, well, I was like, you don't have to come out. But like, she was on the cover of Out magazine with Natasha. Right. So I just really insisted that she do the press, because otherwise no one was going to see the film. I was like, it's going to hurt the film. You don't have to say I'm a lesbian, but you definitely have to do press in the gay stuff. But I remember the Advocate magazine came to set to do a set interview with me. I was always very out. Mm-hmm. And I would say 80% of the actors working on But I'm a Cheerleader were gay. And when the Advocate came to the set, I was all alone doing my interview.
That's so interesting.
It was a weird time, the 90s. Like it was kind of a threshold crossing of actors coming out. I mean, by the way, I still work with closeted lesbians who are very out socially and like, hey, let's go to the gay clubs, Jamie. And then like, they're not out. So I would say it would be interesting if Clea talked about sort of how that whole thing works. But I think now the actors that I know that are in the closet, they're kind of don't ask, don't tell. Like they don't make up a boyfriend, where there was a time where like Clea was doing the red carpet with like random actor boys.
It's funny. I've actually reached out to her people a few times, even most recently to promote High School, the Tegan and Sarah show. And they keep giving me the runaround. Like, I would love a connection to Clea, but like, I would love to interview her on this show about this very topic. Yeah. But that's a sidebar.
Yeah.
Just going back to like your very early days in LA, you used to hang out at Little Frida's. Can you kind of talk about this? Like, I recently interviewed Eileen Chaikin, and she literally would not name. I was like, what was the name of the cafe that the planet is based on? She's like, oh, I don't want to say the name. Meanwhile, we already know the name, that it's Little Frida's. I don't know why she's so protective over that. But can you kind of talk about that? How that really was the inspiration for the planet?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because Eileen was older than us. So she was a generation above us. And she ran with kind of a more like corporate crowd. Little Frida's was much more like indie riot girl, scrappy lesbian vibe. It was run by this woman who was Melissa Etheridge's ex, who was Eileen's age. So like in her 50s, this woman, and she had like really long hair and she was kind of hippie-ish. She was very cool. But the clientele of Little Frida's, it was in Santa Monica, or sorry, it was in West Hollywood, but it was on Santa Monica Boulevard. And it was kind of an indoor-outdoor coffee shop. And they had a lot of music that was a part of it. And I think that was because the owner of it, she had, once again, been dating Melissa Etheridge for a long time. So there was a lot of like Riot Girl, a lot of the music from But I'm a Cheerleader I had heard at Little Frida's. So, for example, the scene that was during the love scene, Madigan Shive, that celloist singer, she is from Little Frida's. Like I knew her from Little Frida's. She was like a little riot girl who was in a couple bands at the time. So yeah, it was when I first moved to LA when I was like 22 out of college. It was definitely the social place to hang out, have a latte, hear music, meet other like young 20-something queer people. So all of my early memories of all of my queer friends that I met in LA were at Little Frida's.
I love that.
Yeah, but you only make money with alcohol. So because it was a coffee shop, I don't think they made very much money, So I think that's why they ended up going out of business.
I want to hear how you discovered Clea DuVall. Like, I know the story of how, like, she worked at a coffee shop and you guys kind of like struck up a friendship. Can you kind of frame it in terms of your ages? Like, how old were each of you and what was your very early friendship like? Because in a way, you kind of discovered her.
I mean, so she worked at Buzz Coffee, which was right below the Sunset 5 Theater in LA. And that was the theater where independent movies showed. So just like the Angelica was in New York, the Sunset 5 was that in LA. So I moved to LA when I was 24 and I went to that movie theater all the time. And Clea worked at the coffee shop right below that theater. And she was super cute. She was 17. She was still in high school. And she gave me some free coffee. And every time I would go, she would give me free coffee. And so we started talking and she lived in her own apartment. And she was living as like an older person because she was really living on her own at that point as a young person. And I remember, invited me over to her like studio apartment and made me like boiled pasta. And she said, I want to be an actress. And I said, oh, do you have an agent? And she said, yeah, I have an agent who her only other client besides me is the old lady from the Where's the Beef commercial.
Okay.
And I was like, okay. But she was like, but she like gets me, some audition. And she had a tattoo of a star on her, or like a Chinese symbol on her shoulder. And I said, what is that? And she said, it's Chinese for star because I'm going to be a star. So she had confidence that she was going to make it. And I was like, well, I'm going to be a director. I said, and I want to make a short film. Will you be in my short film? And she was like, sure. So I was basically writing my first short film at the time that was called Sleeping Beauties. That was a lesbian kind of precursor to But I'm a Cheerleader. It's called Sleeping Beauties. And Clea was kind of like the butch romantic lead of it. So after I worked with her on that short, it got into Sundance. And that was the Sundance where she also had a feature film in competition when she had my short there. And her feature film in competition, I don't even think it ever got released. But a lot of people were like, who cares about that movie? But that actress is really great. So she was starting to blow up at Sundance. And that's where I met the money person, Michael Burns, who ended up giving me the money for Cheerleader because he was like, oh, you have this young actress who's in a movie competition and she's in your short film. And I said to him, hey, let's have another feature film next year with her. And I'll direct it. And he was like, okay. And I was like, we can be here next year. And he was like, okay. So literally that's what we did with But I'm a Cheerleader.
So obviously, like, she and Natasha Lyonne were really tight. And I know, like, the story of how they were just hanging out, driving in a car, and the script for But I'm a Cheerleader was in, like, the passenger side of Clea's car. And, like, Natasha just picked it up and was like, I want to be in this. Like, did she read through the whole script, or did they just want to do a movie together?
They just wanted to do a movie together. And then Natasha was auditioning for everything at that time. And she was kind of a bigger star because she had been in the Woody Allen movie, Drew Barrymore and Julia Roberts and Edward Norton. So Natasha was definitely a bigger star. And I was auditioning Megan's for Clea's part to play against Clea. And Clea was like, I really want you to cast someone that I have chemistry with. And she's like, I really like this actress, Natasha. She's really cool. And I was like, she's a big star. I was like, I just don't know. We're only offering scale. And I also don't think she's right for the part. She's like a gritty New Yorker with like a thick New York accent right. And like curly hair out to here. She had been in some Beverly Hills too. And she was so good. I was like, she's super talented. I just don't think she's right for the part. And Clea said, well, she read the script and she wants to meet on it. So I was like, okay, well, I'll meet with her and maybe she'll show up to the meeting and look kind of more like Megan. So let's see. So I actually flew to New York City and I had coffee with her at some East Village coffee shop. And she showed up in a short leather skirt. She showed up with like crazy platform boots, all black. Her hair was like teased out, like to like ginormous hair. And she just looked like a full rocker chick. I was like, okay, she literally made no effort to look like Megan at all. So I have coffee with her and she's super funny and great, but not a Megan at all. And then she said, you know, who else is in the movie besides Clea? And I said, well, we've cast Bud Cort from Harold and Maude and Mink Stole from all the John Waters movies as Megan's parents. And she was like, wait, what? And I was like, Bud Cort and Mink Stole. And she was like, I'm in. I got to do this movie. Those have to be my parents. Those are my parents. Like, those are my psychic parents. I need those parents. And I was like, okay. And when I left the meeting, I was like, okay, she really wants to do the movie. I was like, I don't know. Like, I still was feeling nervous. But I basically had a meeting with our hair makeup department. And I just said, like, her hair is not right. She's so not a cheerleader. Like, she's a star. And she's funny, but we have to use our hair makeup transformation to like make her into a cheerleader. So
how did RuPaul get involved?
So Ru at the time was a pop star from his song Work It or whatever. His
Supermodel. Yeah,
Supermodel. So he was definitely a pop star. And that year he had been on the Academy Awards with Milton Berle. And Milton Berle had said something really rude to him when they were presenting the award. I don't know if you remember this moment. And then Ru made some really snide comment on live TV that he should be in diapers. And it was super mean. But I remember seeing that video and being like, good for him for like standing up for himself. Like, fuck this Milton Berle guy thinking he can make a joke out of a drag queen. Like Ru is a superstar. Don't fucking do that to Ru. So when I was thinking about Mike and needing someone who was obviously gay, I was like, Ru would be amazing. So his headshot was just literally in a pile of headshots. He was submitted. And so I was like, yeah, I want to meet with him. And so when I met with him, he was so sweet. He was so smart. And he said, who's playing the love interest for my character? And I said, Eddie Cibrian. And he was like, oh my God, I know who that is. Oh my God, I have to do this.
And is it true that in the middle of shooting, Natasha late one night got a tattoo on her shoulder?
I'm not aware of any tattoo that happened.
Oh, I thought I had read something that she had gotten some tattoo and you were like, how could you do that? Because you had to shoot her in like the cheerleading top.
That does not sound like a surprise, but I've forgotten that small detail.
It doesn't. Sounds familiar. It could have happened.
No, seriously. I was like up to my eyeballs in complaints about Natasha and Clea being unprepared, not knowing their lines, partying all night, just like petty crew cast bullshit that was going on. I was like, I'm trying to literally make my like first film that's going to define whether or not I have a career or not. Like, can you please stop bickering? Or, it was just, or like go home early from the hotel party so that you guys don't look all puffy, and like learn your lines. Like they were difficult, but I was friends with them too. So it was like a weird, like, I'm your friend, but now I'm your parent, and like my reputation is on the line. This is not just a party atmosphere, like, and it wasn't just Natasha and Clea, it was all of them. Like, they were all just having the time of their lives. And I was really serious. Like, guys, well,
you're like trying to make your plant your flag in Hollywood. Like, this is like this is your chance.
Yeah. And they were like, we're having the time of our lives. I was like, guys, focus.
So flashing forward to present day, you directed the pilot of both A League of Their Own and Only Murders in the Building, which are like two of the biggest shows of, in the past couple of years. What came first?
The first thing that happened was League of Their Own, the pilot. And I say the pilot, meaning the first episode, because I shot the first episode of League of Their Own. Then I shot the whole series for Only Murders in the Building. And then I shot the rest of the series of League of Their Own. So they literally went right after each other. So basically, Amazon said to us, we'll give you $8 million for the first episode of League of Their Own. You'll have this hour script, and let's see if it works. And if it works and we like it, then we'll finance the rest of the show and give you 7 more episodes. But it took them a while to decide. So while they were deciding whether or not they were going to go for it or not, I got the call during COVID from a friend of mine that I worked on Looking with. So I had done that gay show Looking.
For people who haven't seen it with Jonathan Groff, I watched it. I binged like the entire thing and the movie in like recent months. And I watched the whole thing in like a week. I loved it.
It's so good. The writer of my episode was this guy, John Hoffman. And while we were making the wedding episode, is the episode we worked on together, we had such a blast. We loved working with each other. So during COVID, he called me and said, hey, I'm working on this Steve Martin short thing. The director just fell out because it was originally the directors who did the pilot for This Is Us. He said they fell out. And so we're looking for a pilot director. And I said, well, honestly, I just finished A League of Their Own pilot. Can I show you guys that pilot and maybe you'll give me the job? And he was like, yeah, sure. And so I showed them, first I interviewed, and I really liked the script from him. And the idea of working with John Hoffman again was really exciting. And then I showed them the pilot for A League of Their Own, and they really liked the pilot. So it was definitely, they loved directing. So that's why they gave me the pilot of Only Murders. And then we picked up for the whole series. So we were like the first show to shoot during COVID. So no vaccines, with 2 actors in their 70s and someone who had just had a kidney transplant. So I was very nervous.
So this is Martin Short, Steve Martin, and Selena Gomez.
Yeah. So they were all health compromised. So I was really nervous because there was no vaccines and we were shooting the summer of COVID. And so we started pre-production, and I remember Steve saying like, I'm not going to die, right? And I was like, no, you're going to be fine. I was like, oh shit. So I wore, like, everyone will tell you who worked on it, like I wore like 3 masks, a full face shield. Like I was so nervous. I was like, I am not going to be the reason. My friends, I was in New York for 6 months making that show, were like, hey, come to have dinner. I'm like, guys, I can't do anything. Like I am the one person who's having an interface with all these 3. Like, I'm not going to be the reason these people get sick. So we were very, 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 very safe. But I had big scenes with a lot of extras, and people did get COVID on that show. Thankfully, just not those 3. And then they were first in line for the vaccines. So we were shooting in January when they got the vaccines, and I was so relieved. So it was all together. And then I went straight from Only Murders straight into now shooting episode 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of League of Their Own. So I went straight from New York to Pittsburgh, where we shot the rest of League of Their Own.
whoever's idea it was to make Darcy Carden a redhead is the most valuable player on that show. What was the decision?
That would be me.
Are you serious?
Yeah, that was me. Yes, it was 100% me. And also I got a lot of shit for it from one of the producers who was like, Jamie, you're always complaining that everyone has brown hair. I'm like, yeah, I don't want everyone in the show to have brown hair. I want to give everyone a different hair color so that you can tell the difference between all these girls, because we've cast so many actresses that have Abby's hair color. So I was like, Abby has brown hair. She cannot be in love with someone who looks like, they look totally different, but let's give her a different hair color. So we made Darcy redhead, and then the girl who played Maybelle, she also had brown hair, and I made her a blonde. So no, I was really adamant about making people look different because I was so nervous about them looking the same. I mean, even look at this. This is like a fan image of the two of them. It's so much better because Darcy has red hair and it's not two brunettes.
Is she wearing a wig throughout the whole thing, or was she dyeing her hair?
No, it's a wig.
Okay.
It's a wig. I love this fan art too. It's so good. It's so good. She's wearing a wig throughout the whole thing. And I had worked on Silicon Valley with this amazing wig hair person who does like Barbara Streisand's wigs. And so I called her during COVID because no one was working. And I said, hey, can you come and do this? Like, I really hate wigs and I hate when you can tell, but I know you're really good because if you do Barbara's wigs, these wigs are going to be good. And so like almost everyone's wearing a wig in the show.
And how did that pilot come to you? Like, how did you get the opportunity? Like, did you know Abby Jacobson? Like, how did that land at your feet?
I knew Abby Jacobson a little bit. I didn't know her well, but I did know her a little bit. And I was actually, I think, the first person to interview. And I didn't really know Will Graham at all. And I knew Abby a tiny, tiny bit. So I had my interview and then I never heard anything. And then like 4 months later, I emailed my agent and I said, have they found someone to do the pilot? And she said they did hire someone, but then Amazon was kind of like not happy with the choice, or I'm not sure, like this person had to do a lot of other interviews and maybe some of her other interviews didn't go well. So they haven't hired anyone yet. And I said, well, I literally interviewed 4 months ago and I was the first person to interview. I said, can I interview again and in person? Because I'm actually going back to LA so I could actually meet them in person this time. And she was like, okay, let me call. So she called and said, Jamie wants to meet you in person for this, even though you haven't asked to meet her again. And they were like, okay. And so I met them in person and they were like, hey, we haven't hired anyone yet. And actually the Baseball Hall of Fame is doing an exhibit with all of the original players. And it's happening this weekend in upstate New York with all the 100-year-old ladies. And I was like, you guys have to hire me. Like, I want to go to this thing this weekend. Like, I will, if you hire me right now, I will literally get on the plane tomorrow and go and meet these women. So I had a great meeting. And then after that, I got a call. Okay, you've been hired. And so I literally got on a plane and went to upstate New York. And I went to this like Motel 6 and all these 100-year-old biddies, a lot of them very gay, were there. And we had like a little, drinks and met them all and talked to them all and was introduced as the director of who was going to do this like queer version of their story. And it was a great kickoff. It all started with the actual players and mostly with Maybelle, who was the woman who came out on stage at our premiere, who was very out with me that weekend and kind of told me that everything in the scripts were true and, that there was going to be a lot of backlash and that a lot of the players didn't want the gay story told. And there was a lot of fear. And so I was so proud of her at the premiere when she came out. It was incredible.
I've heard that it really is a good gig to direct a pilot, like how Rose Trochet directed the pilot of The L Word. Like, does that sort of transition you into like, you're now going to be like an executive, because you're an executive producer of both League of Their Own and Only Murders. Is that because you directed the pilots and helped shape the visual tone and everything?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, I've been an executive producer on shows for like the last 6 or 7 years. So I was an executive producer on Silicon Valley and an executive producer on Drop Dead Diva, which was my first EP show. So I've done it on other shows that I haven't directed the pilot on. But it basically just means you're like the in-house director who's kind of around and directing a lot of the show and helping out with a lot of the duties. So it certainly helps if you've directed the pilot, but you can do it just on your own too if you just want to stay with a show for a good amount of time and they want you to stay.
I know that especially in like the 80s and 90s, like no women were getting the opportunity to direct television.
Yeah. Yeah. And pilots, you get paid like 5 times the amount you get paid to do any episode of the show. So that's the reason why women never got to direct them, because it pays so well.
Why is that? Like, why is it so much more lucrative to direct a pilot?
I think because if you don't get right, the whole show sinks. And if you do it right, the show can go on for 10 years and make a lot of money for everybody. So there's just so much pressure on the first episode, especially the first 15 minutes is where people really decide if they want to watch it or not. And I know myself, I've turned off a lot of pilots in the first 15 minutes that, you just have to really get it right. And so prioritizing the first 15 minutes, not only the pilot, but also the first 15 minutes to suck people in. So they want someone who's made a hit show before. And so they're willing to pay a lot more money for that person. But when I first started in TV, the first 10 years, I never met a single female director who was doing pilots. They were all doing episodes, but they weren't doing pilots. And it was really just men who were getting those jobs. So I never knew how well they paid until I got hired for the first time to do a pilot. And I was like, oh, this is why no women were getting these jobs, because you get paid 5 times the amount of money. And then everyone else gets paid just like a standard amount that you make because of your union contract. So it's prestige, and it's also just more pressure, basically. So I like doing pilots. It is a lot more pressure. So it's also sometimes, like right after I did do the pilot of this show in London, and it is a lot of pressure. And I'm excited to go to New York and do Only Murders in the Building season 3, because it's less pressure and it's just fun.
Will you do more of League of Their Own? I mean, to me, it's so weird that Amazon hasn't announced if there's a second season, considering it seems like it's such a big online hit. Do you have any insight as to like what's going on there?
I don't think it's a big online hit. It's a big online hit with our friend group and our like queer audience and world that we know. I think in the general scheme of Amazon shows, like the most popular show on Amazon is Jack Ryan, which I've never seen and no one I know has seen, but that's their number one show. So I think in the grand scheme of numbers of Amazon, I don't think League of Their Own has done well. I do think they were hoping it was more of a crossover, but I think the fact that it's so queer, a lot of older people who are expecting Tom Hanks in like a closeted movie were shocked at how they were talking about gay stuff all the time. So, I mean, I'm so used to it because I've done so much queer content my whole life. So I'm not surprised that it's on the bubble of Amazon, because I do think queer content, it takes an appetite for caring about the queer audience and giving them something that they deserve and that they want, and they subscribe to Amazon. But they're also not like 90% of the consumers. They're their own group of people. So, so I think Amazon hasn't decided yet if they're going to give it a second season, because I don't think the numbers are clear that it's a hit like Stranger Things or something like that.
Mm-hmm. That's which depressing.
Because I don't want to make queer content that's like straight people like. I mean, I want straight people to like my stuff, but at the same time, I also want to make things where it's not just one queer best friend, where it's also like League of Their Own, there were like 50 queer characters and all different kinds of intersectional types of queer people that I find really important for our, for what we want to watch. So I'm really proud of it. But I don't think it was appealing to all of America or all of the world. And I'm fine with that.
You've done so much filming in New York City, like Girls, Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Russian Doll. With Russian Doll versus Only Murders, you sort of have like this East Village story, and then you have this Upper West Side story. How did you land on the building for Only Murders in the Building?
Our big inspiration for the building was John had read a New Yorker article about, who's the woman who wrote When Harry Met Sally?
Nora Ephron?
Yeah. So Nora Ephron wrote a piece in the New Yorker all about the building that she lived in on the Upper West Side. And it's like literally an article about the love story she had with her building. And it's a building that's like right near Zabar's on Broadway. And so that was originally, when John was conceiving it and Steve was conceiving it, the kind of building they were thinking about. So we actually went to that building and we said, can we shoot here? And they said, hell no. So then across the street and like 2 blocks down was the building we ended up shooting in, because they said yes. So it was really hard to find a building during the middle of COVID, when everyone was like, get the hell out of my building and don't give me COVID, that would let us shoot. So that building said you can shoot in the courtyard only. You're not allowed to go inside. So the lobby, we shot at a different building, which is kind of a nondescript building that didn't have a courtyard. And then the courtyard was shot at this one building that said yes, which was like 81st or something, 81st and Broadway. And then the rest was on stages. So it was just really hard to find a building that would say yes, because rich people who live on the Upper West Side who have a big courtyard didn't want COVID vectors shooting in their building.
I mean, being a director is such a sexy role. I know how stressful it can be, and ultimately, like, you can kind of get blamed for everything, but it really is the director who goes in and like cuts the episodes together. Can you talk about how you can like hide mistakes or fix a show in post-production?
I mean, there's so much you can do to fix a million things. I mean, post-production, they say the final rewrite. So you can really rewrite entirely
like
in
how?
the editing room.
I'm so fascinated by this. Like, how?
So like, for example, if you have an actor who in a scene is like, oh my God, and like some really bad acting moment, and then is like just listening in the scene, you can just cut to them when they're doing the listening and cut out the bad acting moment and be on another actor in the scene. So you can fix performances left and right by just not cutting to the person. So if you're just a regular viewer and you notice that they're never cutting to a certain actor except like kind of generic shots of them like nodding their heads, it's probably because they were terrible and they're just cutting away from them. You can fix things with music, where you just have a bunch of close-ups of people and play any kind of music over it. It will give you a totally different feeling. You can fix story by cutting scenes entirely and then putting words into people's mouths that they never actually said on set. There's so much you can do. You can slow things down. You can speed things up. You can do split screens, where you have a good performance from one person in one take and a good performance from someone in the other, and you put the two shots together and, you know, paste it together. There's a million ways to fix a million problems. It's really time consuming, but as long as you have the time, you can pretty much fix anything. You know, directing is very athletic. There's so many ways you can fuck up. So you can have an actor who's not good enough. The way the sun is in the day, you're shooting at the wrong time of day and the light looks terrible. You can just hire the wrong person for acting and they're just wrong for the part. They're a good actor, but they're wrong for the part. If the script's not right and you don't catch it on the day, you're screwed. I mean, there's so many ways to mess things up. So it really is, I feel like a high wire act. And the truth is I've directed for 20 years. I've directed so many scenes, some terrible, some great, some no one will see, some a lot of people saw, some deeply flawed for a million reasons. But I definitely have learned in 20 years how to be better, you know, and you don't always win, you know, sometimes you try and you don't win. So I'm also used to like failing and just getting up and trying the next day, you know, so.
Can we do a little lightning round of your greatest hits here? Like if you can share just like an anecdote, like I'm going to name some shows you've done and just anything, like fond memories you have or just like an interesting anecdote you can think of. Can we do that little game? Sure. Okay, cool. So let's first talk about Girls with Lena Dunham.
The greatest thing about working on Girls was Lena, who is such a brilliant writer. And the biggest challenge to working with Lena is that when she's acting, I could see her watching the actors in the scene as a writer, for example, seeing on her face, oh, they're doing a really good job in the scene right now, rather than being the character who's in the scene. So that was like a challenge for working with Lena, where she's such a writer and director that I could sometimes see her writing and directing while she was watching the scene, even though she was also acting in the scene. But she's a delight and honestly, like a true artist. Very, very talented.
Marvelous Mrs. Maisel and Gilmore Girls, because it's the same creator. If you can talk about those two.
So I directed 18 episodes of Gilmore Girls. So that was 6 years of my life. I directed like 3 episodes a year. And I really got along with Amy. She is another true artist, brilliant. At the time, we were on a really shitty network, the CW. And so no one took our show seriously and we never got Emmys or like anything. And I think it was sexism too, because it was about like women and it was a women writer and creator. And people just were like, who cares? But I was so happy when Amy did The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel on a better network. She was still doing women's stories. But by then, the audience had kind of demanded that people pay attention to her and her really special writing. So that was really a homecoming and finally get the budget to do exactly what Amy wants to do, which is she has really big ideas and all of her like moving camera shots are just so much fun to execute. I had a blast working on Maisel. Some of the most athletic directing I've ever done, because the thing about oneers, which is basically when you only have one shot for the whole scene, which is what Amy likes to do, is everything has to be perfect. And so you would do like 40 takes to make it perfect. So it was very hard work.
Since Maisel and A League of Their Own are both period pieces, it's funny. The biggest criticism I've heard just from friends, I told my friend to watch it and she's like, it just felt like Broad City set in the 40s. She's like, why are they talking like Broad City? I'm like, well, that's the bit. Do you really want to hear what they sound like in the 40s?
Yeah, I think a lot of people didn't like that they spoke in a modern way. And I agree, it was kind of like Broad City in the 40s, but I loved that. I thought that was a really cool mix of tones. So that was definitely what we were going for. And either you like it or you don't. But I'm not interested in like a typical 40s show. And frankly, Amy doesn't do that either. It's very like Amy Sherman Palladino language.
Yeah.
But maybe it's less distracting and less kind of Brooklyn casual that Abby has that thing going. Like there's something about Amy's style of writing that feels more vintage. That's just naturally how, when she did Gilmore Girls, that was a contemporary show, but she has a vintage way of writing, like Dorothy Parker. That's sort of her just natural like rhythm of writing. And so maybe that lent itself better to a period show. And Abby is also a true artist who that is her voice. And so that was the voice of this period show. But I thought it was a cool mix. I liked that was what we were going for. So I totally get it if people don't like that, but I thought it was fun.
Let's talk about Russian Doll and your big reunion with Natasha on this. Season 1 and 2 are among the most creative seasons of television ever made.
Yes. So that was a real love letter between Natasha and Leslie Headland. So Leslie Headland is one of the most talented playwrights out there, I think, in New York. And she and Natasha had become friends. And Natasha is brilliant. And she had obviously the idea, but Leslie executed it in a way that was so special because they were also friends. And so I think she deeply understood what Natasha was trying to do, as far as it was a sci-fi show about AA, basically, and about addiction and about killing yourself every day and then waking up and doing it all over again, and kind of the cycle of using and self-inflicted basically death that addiction causes. So that was sort of the themes behind Russian Doll. But Natasha and Leslie are both really fucking funny. So they were able to take a really dark story about recovery, and that the only way that you can really get into out of the cycle of drinking and drugging and all that stuff is by meeting someone else who's going through the same thing, which is the other character that Natasha meets, who's also dying every day. And that only through meeting each other can they kind of solve the problem, which is to get out of this cycle of killing yourself every day. So it was like really cool metaphors, and Natasha is such an East Village rat, so she really knows that, like, Jack Nicholson, East Village, like she's got that whole vibe going, and always has. And so it was just such a cool mix of like Leslie and Natasha. And then for me, I said to Natasha, when you did But I'm a Cheerleader, you stepped into my world, which is like Megan, like a femme who grew up in Ohio, like all that stuff is very me. And I said, it's so cool for me to step into your creativity and direct you as like your East Village gangster recovery, like her whole like ethos. And it really felt like a true swap of creative juice. And I felt really honored to be a part of that.
Like, for anybody who hasn't seen But I'm a Cheerleader, which I find really hard to believe, I mean, it's basically about this girl who was sent to conversion therapy because her parents and friends think she's gay. She has no idea. And it turns out that they're right, because she meets Clea DuVall in the conversion therapy. Now, how much of this is true to life? Like, I know you didn't go to conversion therapy. So how much of Natasha's character is based on you?
100%. Like, Megan is totally me. I was not a cheerleader, but I did grow up in Ohio. I was just a goody two-shoe who, my mom ran a drug and alcohol teen rehab, and I grew up like really close to my mom's teen rehab, and I spent a lot of time there. I grew up very much a girly girl, and I was always terrible at sports, and like people, all the like lesbian softball players and stuff picked on me because I was so bad, and I was always like last pick. And so when I came out to my family, my mom was like a 60s civil rights person. So she like obviously didn't care that I was gay, but she was just confused because she was like, look, I have a lot of gay friends, and I've literally never met a gay person who's feminine like you. I'm just confused because like I've watched you grow up, and you've always been terrible at sports. You've always, like, I've tried to get you to do stuff and you just won't do it. You just wanted to like play with your Barbies. So I was really confused about like the gender stuff and just this whole idea of femininity. And if you're really feminine, then you can't be queer. And what does that mean? And so another thing I really wanted to talk about in the film was I wanted the feminine part of Megan to not change when she like owned her queerness. Like, I wanted her to still be a cheerleader at the end. She's still the same person. She's just also a queerdo. So in the whole construct of like masculinity and femininity, I also just found totally ridiculous that had anything to do with queerness, because it really doesn't, you know?
Like, when you were a teenager, like, what were you into? Like, like in your formative years, early, I guess like late teens, like what music, TV, like what were you super into?
I was like obsessed with Barbie. So that's very real. And I was really into going to the movies. So I went to see like every movie. And I was a theater nerd. Like, I was like the lead actress in every play and I was never a singer. So I was like tech in the musicals, which was great because it was actually tech that made me realize I liked being behind the scenes more than I liked acting. But if you asked anyone from my high school, they would be like, she was the lead in every single play. I was the thespian lesbian.
I love it. Okay, the final in your greatest hits here, going back to the L Word, you directed, I think, maybe 3 episodes of the L Word. Can we talk about your approach to filming sex scenes? And then how do you shoot around different actresses' nudity clauses?
Yeah. So what I do is I have a conversation with the actors and I say, what do you like about your body? What do you not like about your body? So what are you like okay to show? What are you just like, I hate this part of my body, I don't want to show it. So like when I worked with Leisha, she was like, I'm fine if you show, I can't even remember what I showed, maybe my butt, but I don't want you to show my boobs or something like that. I don't know what it was, but I'll ask the actors directly, like what makes you comfortable. And I did the same thing on girls, because I had a lot of scenes on that too with men and women. And I actually remember I asked Adam Driver, will you do full frontal? And he was like, I will do full frontal, but you don't want to see my ass because it's flat and no one wants to see that. And he was like, you can show my dick. And I was like, okay, let me see if I can make that work. So, different actors have different hang-ups where they're like, I don't like this, I don't like that. So yeah, I just talk to them directly. And then I'll say to the actor in the scene, okay, they don't like their like love handles. So when you're kissing them, can you put your hands on their love handles so that you can't see it? Or I'll talk to the DP and say, like for Natasha and Clea, they were like, I'm not comfortable doing any nudity, either one of them. They both said, I will do absolutely no nudity. So I was like, okay. So I spoke to the cinematographer and I said, can we make the scene really, really, really dark so that you don't think about the fact that they're fully dressed? And he was like, okay. And then when I got an NC-17 on the first cut of the film, I talked to the ratings board and I said, why did I get an NC-17? I have literally no nudity. And they said, well, it was so dark that we were sure that in the darkness that they were nude and we don't know what was going on. And I said, well, how about I lighten it up in the lab and then I'll show it to you again to prove to you how literally nothing is going on. And they were like, okay. And so that's how I got the NC-17 taken off. So it worked, like, because your mind thinks, oh, it's so dark, there must be crazy stuff going on. But it was literally those really pink, boring nightgowns that they were wearing and no nudity. Like it was terrible. Like I had nothing. It wasn't sexy at all on set.
And with the L Word as a director, I mean, it's interesting because they've had, male, female, gay, and straight directors. But for you, what was your approach to making the sex scenes realistic? Because sometimes they can just really, you just have it's like, what are these people doing? Like you have no idea what is going on.
Oh, I think I know something about lesbian sex, so I could give advice about what they might be doing. But also, most of them were gay at that point. So, I mean, out and proud and giving suggestions too. So I really try to make it as much of a conversation between the actors and the director so that no one feels like there's some mandate. It's more like, let's explore this together and how can we make this something that we're all comfortable with.
So suppose there's somebody who's like, no, I'm not showing any nudity, but then they're cast opposite somebody who's like, okay, like I am okay. Do you just go,
yeah,
like, do you just say, okay, yeah, well then we're not going to show anything? Like what is the approach there?
Oh God, no. I'll push it to exactly what everyone is willing to do. So I actually did have that on the L Word because Jennifer Beals had a no nudity clause. Nothing. She'll show nothing. So any scene you do with Jennifer Beals, the other person you can show nudity, but she won't do any nudity. So no, I would definitely, whoever is willing to do nudity will do them. Like, and that was the thing about Lena, is Lena was always willing to do nudity. It was trying to get the other actors to do nudity. And at one point we did end up saying to actors on Girls, like, you guys, it's just Lena at this point. This is getting a little embarrassing. Like, you've got to work with us a little bit, So, but no, if you can get an actor to be comfortable enough to show something. I mean, my goal as a director is to make the scene sexy, and it's really hard to make things sexy when one will show any skin. It doesn't have to be nudity, but just skin. Like, skin is what's sexy.
When But I'm a Cheerleader was released, like, it's like it was this big hit. It like made money, and yet a lot of the gay male reviewers would trash it. Like, I know, like, in Entertainment Weekly at the time, and there was like comparison, like, oh, she's trying to be John Waters. Like, what was your reaction at the time, and how do you kind of reflect back on that?
I mean, I would just hope that anyone who's listening to this who is making something that people have said is garbage and give you an F in Entertainment Weekly and all the abuse that the movie got, you just have to keep going. And I was really lucky because I was part of the Riot Girl thing going on in the 90s. And that whole mantra was like, we don't care. If we can't play our instruments well, we're going to fucking play anyway and shut the fuck up. So it's not for you. So stop listening and get out of our way. So that that whole kind of ethos of the music movement at the time, which a lot of those people couldn't play. But guess what? After they played 50 gigs, they learned how to play. So I was like, this movie is not for you. I don't care. This movie was made for my lesbian friends and my like world, which is not your world. No lesbians have power. None of us write reviews. None of us have money. Like, get the fuck out of my way and let people watch the movie. So I just was like very stubborn about, I don't care if the mainstream media likes this or not, because I don't like the mainstream media. So.
And the joke is on them because it has this enduring legacy. It's like you just did a re-release a few years ago with like a director's cut. It is now heralded as one of the great cult classics of like the late 90s.
I think it was ahead of its time. And I think that a lot of gay men at the time who did have power and who were writing reviews and who had money, as a lot of men have money and women don't, they were really devastated by everything that was going on with the AIDS crisis. Obviously, it was horrible. And it was like no one was making comedies about gay life. And here was this young lesbian who was making a joke about gay people in this really horrible environment, which is conversion therapy. And I understand that that was a serious thing, but I also was like, I don't want to be a part of a community that can't laugh at itself. And this is a heartfelt, warm comedy from within the community. And it's not mean-spirited, and it's not John Waters, because John Waters never had like a romantic love, like a real kind of gooey emotional core to his films. They're very cynical. And that's just not who I am. And I ultimately am like a girl from Ohio. And I wanted to do a funny movie that was very me, which was funny, but also heartfelt and wasn't making fun of everything. And that had like a real stylistic flair, which was frankly more inspired by like Tim Burton and Derek Jarman than it was John Waters. But I love John Waters, by the way, but I wasn't trying to be John Waters.
Do you just get the biggest kick that Natasha Lyonne has become this lesbian icon, this enduring lesbian icon, and she's like so beloved by the community?
I know, and so not a lesbian. Yes, I've said that to her before, where I'm like, I made you an icon, you're welcome. And she's like, yeah, but I'm not gay. Do you know how much fucking like guys I would get if I weren't a lesbian icon? So I think she does like a lesbian icon, and she obviously is like she's open, but I do actually think she's straight, and I think she's happy that lesbians love her, but yeah, she's it's an interesting thing that's happened.
Well, I love how once a year she posts that picture of her and Clea DuVall where they literally look like Leonardo DiCaprio and whoever he played opposite in Romeo and Juliet. They literally look like that they're at the premiere, and she and Clea is Leonardo DiCaprio and it's Natasha Lyonne.
Yeah, I do think that they had like a love affair as friends, and it was a very intense relationship at the time that I was navigating between the two of them. And it still remains like an intense relationship. There's just something between those two that's really special. And it was never sexual, but you know, it's like all of us who've met like these weird soulmates that cross our paths in our lives. And you're like, there's just something that we have with them, and it will just always be there.
So, final thought here. What advice would you have for any kind of creative who feels stuck or success isn't happening fast enough? They're feeling a bit lost.
Yeah. I mean, I have never been picky about jobs that I have taken. And a lot of my contemporaries have been really picky, and they just don't work, you know, and I think this is also what I learned from when I worked with David Fincher, is he was directing battery commercials, and like he directed hundreds of shitty music videos, hundreds, like Rick Springfield, and like, yeah, he directed Madonna, but he also directed a lot of really shitty ones.
He directed Vogue and other videos for Madonna.
You do get better by working. So just say yes to everything, I think. So I just have said yes to a lot of things, and other directors who started at Sundance would just be like, I want to do indie films, or I want to do pilots only, or I want to do, really high end, whatever. And I was willing to take whatever shitty thing came across my plate and then I made so many relationships working on like one of the first CW shows I worked on, and we never got any love, was Gilmore Girls. 22 episodes a year. Amy Sherman Palladino is a brilliant writer. And I directed 18 episodes of that show. And I was like, there is no one more talented than Amy. She is so talented as a writer, director, force of nature. And I recognized that 20 years ago. So of all of the directors of Gilmore Girls, I'm the only director that also directed Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Mm-hmm.
Also stay friends with people. Like if you see someone you work with on some CW show from 20 years ago, like keep them in your life. If they're awesome, they're awesome. Over time, people started recognizing that she's brilliant and Gilmore Girls was brilliant. But at the time, it was like really sexist. We had no money, no budget, and it was like a lame network. But that show also has like aged really well over time because it's like, yeah, she's brilliant. And she always was. So I've also just like made friends along the way. And I think a lot of people are always like, I want to meet this person and they can help me and this person can help me and this person can help me. I'm like, look around you. It's the people around you. Like no one thought Amy was going to be like an Emmy winner, but I knew because she was my friend and I could see how talented she was. So it's like, look around you and see where the talent is and you guys rise up together. I've always helped my friends and I've always had like a posse of women, like another friend of mine, Nisha Ganatra. She made an indie film same time as me. And I was like, But I'm a Cheerleader is great, but Chutney Popcorn is really fucking great. Like you guys need to hire her. She could not get a job. 20 years she tried to get a job. 10 years she tried to get a job. And no one would hire her for episodic TV. And then they actually had offered me a job as a producer director for Transparent, and I couldn't do it. And I said, you guys should hire Nisha, like my friend who is so talented and the industry is just not giving her a break. And so Joey Soloway hired her and she directed a bunch of Transparent and was a producer on the show in her first season. And then just like the popular gig, once she had done a bunch of episodes, her career is on fire.
I know Nisha. We actually have a close mutual friend. She actually directed the finale of And Just Like That, and also Girls, Black Monday. She's like blowing up.
It's just, you got to be in it for the long game and you have to just wait for your moment because it is really annoying. But, I do think it's getting better. I think they're giving more women breaks than they ever have before. And they're willing to like, okay, she's never directed a pilot before, but yeah, let's hire her. She's a lesbian. It's a lesbian story. Like maybe we should hire Jamie as a pilot director. So I do think they're starting to let the door open a little bit more. And it's just trying to keep yourself in there long enough for someone to give you the break,
That is beautiful advice. Thank you. Jamie Babbitt, you're the greatest. I'm so happy that we were finally able to do this. Like I said, I've just followed your entire career. Like I saw But I'm a Cheerleader at the Angelica. Like I was a senior in high school in 1999 and I went with my like theater kid, like gay friend, and neither one of us were out. And I just like followed your entire career and I'm just the biggest fan. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. Thanks for watching everything and being there. And I'm glad we finally got to talk.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a great day. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. Have a great day.
Thanks so much for listening. You can follow me, Jess X NYC, across all social media, Instagram, and definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel that is Hot Takes and Deep Dives and my name, Jess Rothschild, where you can watch videos of all of these interviews.